March 1943. The air over Western Europe trembled with war. At 25,000 feet, the sky looked calm. But below the clouds, death moved in formation. American B-17 bombers droned eastward, their wings rimed with frost, engines thundering as they crossed the coast of France. Inside, gunners scanned the horizon, waiting for the black dots that always came, and soon they appeared, climbing fast, slicing through the sunlight. The Luftwaffe, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs broke through the clouds, diving straight into the bomber streams. The air exploded into fire and smoke. Every burst of cannon fire meant another fortress falling, another crew swallowed by the cold. But that morning the bombers weren't alone. Flying above them were shapes the Germans had never seen before, thick, round-bodied fighters with wings like slabs of armor and engines that sounded like thunder trapped in steel. The P-47 Thunderbolt had arrived. To the Germans it looked ridiculous, oversized, overweight, a flying oil drum that couldn't possibly fight. Reports from the ground mocked it. Too big to turn, too slow to climb, but the Americans called it something else. They called it the Jug, short for juggernaut. It wasn't built for grace. It was built to survive. The heart of the beast was a Pratt & Whitney R-2800, 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, and a roar that could shake glass from the windows of English cottages when it took off. When the Thunderbolt climbed, the sound carried for miles. When it dove, it screamed like falling iron. The pilots of the 56th Fighter Group, led by Hub Zemke, didn't know whether to trust it. The plane was enormous, nearly 7 tons when fully loaded. It burned fuel like a bomber, needed runways long enough for takeoff rolls that made ground crews nervous, and could barely see over its own nose. But in combat, all the jokes died fast. Over France, a formation of P-47s ran head-on into a pack of FW-190s. The German fighters hit first, guns flashing, shells slamming into the big new planes. And nothing happened. The Thunderbolt stayed in formation, smoke trailing, engines still running. Then they turned. 8 50-caliber machine guns opened up in unison, and the sky filled with fire. One German pilot never made it home. Another ditched in the channel. When the survivors landed, they filed shaken reports. The new American fighter can't be shot down. Back in England, the mechanics couldn't believe what they saw. One Jug came back with half its tail missing, another with its engine shot through and still turning. A third landed on one wheel. The pilot stepped out, wiped the oil from his goggles, and laughed. "She's ugly," he said, "but she's mean." That day, the P-47 earned its legend. It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the lightest, but it could do something no other fighter could. Take a direct hit from a 20mm cannon and keep flying. It could dive faster than anything in the sky. And when it hit back, it hit like a hammer. Soon, the Luftwaffe learned to listen for it. The deep, rolling growl of a Thunderbolt descending at 450 miles an hour. It was the sound of something indestructible, something too stubborn to die. And in the frozen spring skies of 1943, that sound marked the beginning of Germany's long defeat. Because this flying monster, the one they laughed at, would soon become the very thing they feared most. July 1943, England. The airfields of East Anglia were never silent. Engines coughed, mechanics shouted, and the smell of fuel hung in the damp morning fog. Every dawn began the same way, the low thunder of bombers warming up, the metallic echo of tools striking steel, and the quiet prayers of men who knew that by nightfall some of their friends wouldn't return. The air war over Europe had become a meat grinder. Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Bremen, each raid left the sky darker, the losses higher. German fighters waited like wolves, rising through the clouds in tight packs, hungry and patient. And for every bomber that crossed into the Reich, 10 Messerschmitts were already waiting. The Americans were learning the cost of daylight bombing. Every briefing ended with names written in chalk. Every evening someone had to erase a few. But in that brutal summer, something began to change. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the aircraft everyone had called too big, too clumsy, too heavy to fight, kept flying. And with every sortie, it taught its pilots something new about survival. Hub Zemke led the 56th Fighter Group with an iron will and a scientist's precision. He studied combat reports line by line, searching for patterns in chaos. He trained his men not to fight the German way, not to twist and turn like Spitfires, not to outclimb the enemy, but to use the Jug's greatest strength, power and speed in a dive. Zemke called it boom and zoom, hit hard, break away, climb back into the sun. The Jug wasn't a knife fighter, it was a hammer. In late July, over northern France, Zemke's men met their test. A formation of B-17s was under attack, a swarm of FW-190s slicing through the bombers like blades. The 56th dived in from 25,000 feet, throttles indeed open, engines howling. The German pilots saw them coming and laughed. The new American fighter looked too heavy to turn, too slow to catch them. They turned toward the Jugs, confident as ever. The first passes were brutal. Cannon shells burst across the Thunderbolt, sparks flaring from armor plate. But the Jugs didn't break formation. They dove straight through the chaos. Massive, roaring, unstoppable. When the 50 caliber guns opened up, the laughter died. 8 barrels per wing. Each fighter carried the firepower of a small bomber. Tracer rounds stitched across the sky, cutting into German planes like molten wire. One Focke-Wulf erupted in flames before it even had time to roll. The P-47s didn't just fight, they endured. One pilot took 3 hits to the tail and kept climbing. Another had his canopy shattered by cannon fire, blood in his eyes, oxygen hissing from a ruptured line, but the engine never quit. He leveled off, turned back toward the fight, and scored a kill before limping home across the channel. When he landed, his ground crew froze. There were over 250 bullet holes in the fuselage. The wings were torn. The oil system was leaking, and yet that monster of an airplane had carried him home. That night, Zemke gathered his men in the briefing room. He said nothing for a moment, just stared at the damage reports. Then he smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, "I think we've found our fighter." The next morning, the mechanics began painting lightning bolts on the cowlings, the birth of Zemke's Wolfpack. Their mission wasn't just to protect bombers anymore, it was to hunt. Each sortie went deeper into German airspace. Each return flight brought back more scars and more stories. Thunderbolts came home with missing flaps, shredded elevators, oil burning on the cowling, and pilots still grinning behind cracked canopies. The Luftwaffe began to notice. Pilots started warning each other over radio. "Achtung! The round-nosed ones, don't waste your ammo. They don't go down." One German ace, Franz Stigler, was heard muttering to his wingman, "You can shoot a Thunderbolt until your guns melt. It will still bring its pilot home." And it was true. The Jug's cockpit was a steel bathtub. Its fuel tanks sealed themselves when hit. Its massive radial engine didn't rely on fragile coolant systems like the inline engines of German fighters. You could rip half its cylinders apart, and it would still keep running. The P-47 was not designed to survive war. It was designed to survive anything. By August, Zemke's Wolfpack was rewriting the rules of air combat. They didn't turn with the Germans. They outdived them, outclimbed them, and hit with a fury no one could match. Every mission left the Luftwaffe weaker. Every fight proved the Jug's legend wasn't a myth. It was a fact. Soon, bomber crews began to relax when they heard the deep, thunderous growl of radial engines in formation. They'd look out their windows, see those massive round noses and broad wings, and feel the same thing every time: relief. because they knew the Jug was up there, and the Jug always came back. By autumn, the 56th Fighter Group had become the deadliest unit in the 8th Air Force. They painted kills beneath their cockpits, FW-19s, 109s, even Me-19s shot out of the sky, and every time the Germans tried to adapt, Zemke's men found new ways to break them. But Hub Zemke wasn't done. He had a vision for the Thunderbolt, something beyond escort duty. The plane's toughness, its speed in a dive, its sheer firepower, it was too much to waste chasing fighters. Soon the Jug would descend from the clouds, and the German army, not the Luftwaffe, would learn what thunder really meant. Normandy, June 1944. The beaches burned. The sea was red with iron and blood. Overhead, the sky filled with the roar of engines. Not bombers this time, but fighters. Big, round-nosed beasts that looked too heavy for the clouds. The P-47 Thunderbolt had come to war on the ground. It flew low, hunting. Columns of German armor crawled through the hedgerows, their camouflage useless under the open sky. From 5,000 feet, the Jug began its dive. Air screaming, wings trembling, machine guns already flashing before it even leveled out. 8 50 caliber Brownings tore through the air, throwing a wall of fire and metal. Trucks burst into flames, tanks shuddered, tracks ripped apart. And when the Thunderbolt finally pulled out, it left a trail of wreckage behind. Smoke, fire, and silence. The Germans had never seen anything like it. A fighter that could dive like a bomb, strike like a storm, and take hits that would shatter anything else. Even the feared 88mm flak guns couldn't reliably stop it. Pilots returned with entire wings shredded, elevators gone, holes the size of fists punched clean through the fuselage. And yet they landed, engines still running, armor plates still holding. One Luftwaffe report put it bluntly, the P-47 cannot be destroyed with rifle or machine gun fire, only cannon and only at close range. They started calling it der Panzerflugzeug, the tank airplane. Every part of the Thunderbolt had been built with survival in mind. Its radial engine had no vulnerable coolant lines like the Mustang or Spitfire. Its cockpit sat inside a bathtub of armor. Half an inch of steel behind the pilot's seat, another half-inch around the sides. Its self-sealing fuel tanks swelled shut when punctured, choking out flames before they could spread. It was more than just tough. It was designed for punishment. In the 56th and 78th Fighter Groups, pilots swapped stories that bordered on unbelievable. One pilot, Lieutenant Robert Johnson, was attacked by 8 Focke-Wulfs. Cannon shells ripped through his fuselage, his canopy, his tail. His plane caught fire, then went out again in the slipstream. His controls jammed. His oxygen line was severed. He was trapped inside a coffin of smoke and flame. And yet the engine kept running. Johnson fought the stick until his arms went numb. When he finally limped back across the channel, his plane barely held together. The mechanics counted 21 cannon hits. The engine still turned over. The Germans couldn't believe it. One of their pilots swore he saw the P-47 explode in midair. It hadn't. It just kept flying. By late 1944, the Jug had evolved from escort to executioner. It no longer just defended bombers. It ruled the battlefield. Thunderbolts strafed supply lines, shredded armored trains, and obliterated entire convoys with rockets and bombs. The sound of their engines became a nightmare for German troops. Men on the ground learned to dive for cover the moment they heard that rolling growl above the clouds. When the Allies pushed through Normandy, it wasn't just the Sherman tanks that cleared the path. It was the Thunderbolts above them. They were the steel angels of the invasion, unstoppable, unbreakable, and merciless. Each pilot knew he was flying a weapon the enemy couldn't match. The Mustang might win dogfights, the Spitfire might turn tighter, but only the P-47 could dive through flak, tear up a panzer column and still make it home with half a wing. In the skies of France, Belgium, and the Ardennes, one truth became clear. Germany had lost its grip on the air. Their sleek fighters were outnumbered, outgunned, and now outlasted. The Luftwaffe could still fight, but it couldn't stop the thunder. And from that summer onward, whenever German soldiers heard the low, rumbling growl rolling across the fields, they didn't look up to see what it was. They ran, because they already knew. It was the flying tank, and it was coming for them. December 1944. The Ardennes. The forest was silent, the snow fresh, and the cold unbearable. Then came the thunder. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Hitler's last desperate strike in the west. German armor pushed through the mist. Hundreds of tanks, thousands of men. For a brief moment they believed they might win it all back. But above those frozen trees, another army stirred. The weather broke on the third day. The clouds split, and sunlight bled through the gray. That's when the Americans unleashed their secret weapon, not in numbers, but in noise. From the south came the sound, that deep, rumbling growl that soldiers had learned to fear. The P-47 Thunderbolt. They flew in from every direction, silver, scarred, and armed to the teeth. Under each wing hung bombs and rockets. Inside each wing, 8 heavy guns waited, eager. German troops tried to hide their convoys under the trees, covering tanks with branches, painting trucks in whitewash, anything to avoid being seen. It didn't matter. From 5,000 feet, the Jug could see everything. The first pass came without warning. A pair of P-47s roared over the treetops, flak bursting around them like black flowers. They didn't swerve, didn't climb. They dove straight into the storm. Machine guns opened up, the noise rolling across the forest like artillery. A German Panther caught a direct hit from a 500-pound bomb. The explosion sent snow and armor flying in every direction. When the smoke cleared, the tank was gone. The Thunderbolts kept coming. Dive, fire, pull up, repeat. Each pass ripped through the German columns, turning the white landscape into black scars of burning steel. By the end of the week, thousands of vehicles were destroyed or abandoned. The Luftwaffe tried to strike back, but their numbers were broken, their fuel running out. They rose, fought, and fell in flames. And once again, the P-47 proved why it was feared more than any other Allied aircraft. It wasn't invincible, but it was close. Even when shrapnel tore through the fuselage or an engine took a direct hit, the Jug refused to die. Pilots brought home planes that looked like they'd been through hell itself. Some flew on 3 cylinders. Some landed without hydraulics. One pilot came back with half his elevator gone, still in control, still alive. The German soldiers gave it a name whispered through the lines, Der Donnerschlag, the thunder strike. To them, it wasn't a plane anymore. It was a curse from the sky. And for the Allied troops on the ground, it was salvation. Whenever they were pinned down, they radioed one word, Jugs. Minutes later, the sound would come, deep, rolling, inevitable. Thunderbolts would arrive, low, fast, engines screaming. They strafed trenches, bombed gun positions, and turned ambushes into ashes. Even the mighty Tiger tanks, once symbols of terror, became targets. Trapped, burning, helpless under the Jug's relentless firepower. Day after day, the sky over the Ardennes burned. The German offensive stalled, then broke, then ended. When it was over, the fields were littered with wrecks, tanks, trucks, guns, all crushed under a storm that came from above. The pilots of the 9th Air Force called it the Thunder Season. The men on the ground called it the sound of survival. By the time spring returned, the Thunderbolt had destroyed over 86,000 enemy vehicles across Europe. No other fighter in history had ever carried such firepower for so long and lived to tell the tale. It was more than a plane now. It was a machine that had changed the rhythm of war, a steel monster that rained fury until the enemy's will broke. And for every German soldier who heard that distant rumble in the clouds, the message was the same. Thunder was coming, and it never missed. May 1945. Germany was burning. The Reich had fallen. Berlin was rubble, its skies silent at last. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. Across the vast Pacific, Japan still fought on, city by city, island by island. And once again, the Thunderbolt followed the war wherever it went. They shipped them by the hundreds across the ocean, crated, reassembled, and flown from coral runways under the sweltering sun. The same planes that had faced flak over Europe now lifted off over Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Different continent, same mission. To the Japanese, the P-47 was a new kind of monster. They had seen the nimble Hellcats and the swift Corsairs, but the Jug was something else. Louder, heavier, unstoppable. It didn't dance in the sky. It crushed it. In the Pacific, the Thunderbolt became a sledgehammer. It dropped napalm and 1,000-pound bombs on airfields, rail lines, and coastal defenses. It strafed troop convoys and shredded transport ships trying to slip through the island chains. Japanese Zeros tried to intercept, but they couldn't climb fast enough. And when they did, the P-47s dove, the sky howling as 8 heavy guns roared in defiance. Aces who had once fought over Normandy now painted new victories across the blue Pacific. The same steel armor that had saved lives over France now shielded them from flak bursting over the jungles of Luzon and the mountains of Burma. The Thunderbolt had become universal, a machine born in New York, feared in Europe, and now unleashed over the Pacific. But for the men who flew it, the war had changed. The missions grew longer, the targets more desperate. They bombed what was left, cities already in ruins, airfields empty of planes. And then came the news. August 6th, Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki. The Jug pilots sat in stunned silence when they heard. Some cheered, believing it meant the end. Others just stared at the ground. They had seen enough burning cities to understand what those words really meant. When Japan finally surrendered, the skies were quiet again. No flak, no tracers, no engines screaming through clouds of smoke. The P-47 sat in rows on the airfields. Dusty, scarred, their paint chipped by 2 years of war. Some were scrapped, others flown home. A few left behind in silence, their propellers slowly rusting in the Pacific heat. But for the men who had flown them, the Jug would never be forgotten. It was the plane that carried them through hell and back. It could dive like lightning, strike like thunder, and still bring its pilot home when everything else had failed. It didn't have the sleek lines of the Mustang or the fame of the Spitfire. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't elegant. It was something better. Reliable. The Jug was a weapon of survival, a fortress with wings. In Europe, it broke the Luftwaffe. In the Pacific, it shattered the last defenses of an empire. And in the years that followed, its design would become the foundation for everything that came after, from the F-84 Thunderjet to the first American jets that ruled the sky in Korea. The Thunderbolt was never built to be loved. It was built to win, and it did. When the last P-47 engines fell silent, their echoes lingered, deep, heavy, and proud. The kind of sound that once rolled across France, the Ardennes, and the islands of the Pacific. The kind of sound that made enemies look up in fear and allies smile in relief. The Germans called it the flying tank. The pilots called it the Jug. But history remembers it for what it truly was, the thunder that ended a storm. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about World War II.